Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us and tearing yourself away from this beautiful fall day. It's absolutely gorgeous outside. We are going to have our speaker today, but at the end, we do have time for questions and answers. So wait until I come around with my handy-dandy little microphone, because otherwise this is being streamed, and otherwise it won't be heard on the other end through the computer to the families that are listening there. Also, if you could turn your phones off, that would be great. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Ari Laskin is the co-founder of Double Bind Media and is currently a National Endowment for the Humanities Project Director. For the past decade, he has served as an Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow, media historian, and film professor teaching courses in global cinema, comparative media studies, critical studies, and film production. He frequently works as a writer and editor in academic publishing, film programming, and also serves on film festival juries. As a filmmaker, his films are shown internationally, and he is currently in production on a film exploring the relationship between the Holocaust, documentary realism, and memorials. Please welcome Dr. Ari Laskin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd like to thank the Historical Society just more broadly for really facilitating this whole project. I'd like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities. They funded this primarily. I'd like to thank Helena College, the Montana History Foundation. But really, thank you all for coming today. We're gonna watch this film. It's about 18 minutes today, and I'd really just genuinely like to hear what you think. It hasn't really screened that much. We made it this summer. So we'll be doing that this afternoon, but before we get to that, I'd like to sort of explain the context of this film, where it's coming from, the program through which it came from, and some of the challenges and successes that it's had. I'm a teacher, and there's challenges in teaching sort of historical filmmaking work that I'm curious what you think. So feel free to sort of chime in at any moment. We'll have sort of a Q&A afterwards. Today I'm gonna give you a little context. This film was produced through a major grant through the National Endowment for the Humanities. The sort of goals of the grant, this is the second of 3 years, so we have one more year left. I don't totally know if I'm going to renew it or not. That's sort of to be determined. The goals of this grant are really to develop and cultivate the humanities at a 2-year college. It's run through Helena College, and it's a film program. It's a summer 2-week course that it is really all-encompassing about filmmaking in 2 weeks. The students, it's open to high school seniors, give or take a year, sort of just broadly around that age. It's really, the main goal is to give students a little taste of what the humanities are like in a post-secondary higher ed context. And we generally accept around just over a dozen students. I think our average over the past 2 years has been about 13 or 14. It's relatively competitive to get in. We do some recruiting around the local high schools. One of the imperatives of the grant is to just look at local histories, Montana histories. It is a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, and so traditionally filmmaking is not taught with the humanities. And I think it's important before you watch this to really understand what it means to teach filmmaking with a sort of humanities bent. I have, for the past decade, I've taught filmmaking in Los Angeles. I've taught sort of around the world, but for the past decade, primarily, it's been in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a city of film schools. There's dozens and dozens of film schools there. And I've taught at a couple of them. And they each teach in a different way. Some of the bigger schools, University of Southern California, UCLA, the humanities are sort of sequestered away from the technical side of film production. Usually big programs, film programs, have a big divide in them. On one side, you have film production. On the other side, you have film history and film theory. And they're siloed, generally. There's a little crossover. And I've taught at those schools, and there's pros and cons, really, to that method. But the bulk of really what I like teaching is where you seamlessly intertwine those two sides, where the technical and the historical are linked. We live in a day and age where, you can buy a camera and it's relatively automated, right? It's, you can just put it in auto mode and point, and it'll sort of take care of some of the key elements of capturing image and sound, like focusing, autofocus, auto exposure. But to understand what those mean is a different thing. How those are part of a sort of the language of cinema is completely sort of different. And so this sort of humanities method shows the histories of these aesthetic traditions. Just by way of example, you have something like focal length. It's literally the length of a camera lens. Traditionally in Hollywood, you've shot women and men with different focal lengths, which produces a different effect on how the face looks. It either sort of expands or contracts the face of the subject being filmed. You might not know what focal length is, but inherently in how you watch a film now, it's sort of part of your visual subconscious that when you see a female, you expect it to sort of be distorted in this particular way versus a male. It's part of the tradition. As soon as you sort of understand the technical aspect of that, you can see how you can wield that factor as a filmmaker. It's empowering, right? So that's just one example of thousands of how I'm interested in sort of decoding the sort of visual language of filmmaking, and it's inseparable from its history, and it's inseparable from sort of the ideological aspects of, representing gender, for example. So this model that we used in this NEH was this sort of model of intertwining history and technical aspects of filmmaking. This year we chose the Capitol as our subject, and it proved to be a wonderful sort of topic, but also presented some challenges in and of itself. I want to sort of lay out a couple of those challenges. One of the challenges is that it's a building that is deeply equivocal. It has two sides. A side that I think I can certainly stand behind. It was the Capitol itself was formed during a tumultuous time as as this territory sort of gained statehood. It was a rough and tumble region that involved things like corruption, a side of our history that maybe we're slightly embarrassed about. But also, these people came together and, created a polis, a place where democracy could thrive. And so we have this other side that I think are things that I can get behind. So, how do you teach this history? So a little bit of sort of context on how this, this course, this 2-week course develops. I'm the director of this program. I have a great team over at Helena College. I think it's really been, amazing to work there on this project. But I try to pick topics that are broad enough and rich enough to sort of provide good enough material for students to work on. Enough archival material, enough sort of meat on the bone to make an interesting film. And so basically at the beginning of the course, I just really present a broad topic, the Capitol, and let the students have enough creative freedom to really put their own inflection on the topic, frame it in ways that they want to. The first year, we looked at the Spanish flu in Montana, and the students made a film. It was, we were still sort of in the throngs of Omicron when they made this, and the students decided to, their spin was really sort of understanding how, the Spanish flu could sort of help them personally through their struggles with sort of COVID-19. But we had here the Capitol. That was the broad topic that I presented to the students. But it had this sort of equivocation, this sort of darker side, but also this side that I am sort of really sort of stand behind. But it isn't my film. But the sort of danger here is this dark side of the state formation, the architecture is dangerous. I guess I want to sort of explain in what I mean by this. I think one of the interesting things is in the sort of architecture, you have these really interesting gestures. Here we have the rotunda. You have these, I think this is the laser pointer. Yeah, we have here these sort of 4 murals on the sort of ceiling, I think, or sort of transitioning from ceiling to wall, which sort of show different types of Montanans. I think these murals are, there's no real sort of gestures towards realism. They're in some ways, caricatures of characters. I think you could almost call them, like the in the bottom left quadrant here, we have sort of a desert scenario that that sort of doesn't conform to really anything in Montana, maybe, but more a sort of a type or something that might be found in New Mexico or Arizona. But what's interesting here is you have this gesture towards diversity, right? We have, the trapper, the Native American. We have here in some of the founding gestures a sort of a plurality, maybe a sort of a proto-multiculturalism. Which I think is, even though, I think it's just a very superficial gesture. We have something like the Charlie Russell sort of painting, as the really sort of the marquee artwork in the Capitol. We have here a clear celebration of Native Americans. I think you see it in a host of ways in this image. If we just look at the composition of the image, we have here in the very center, we have the Native Americans, and we have sort of any Western, Lewis and Clark, I believe, on the far right. Sorry, this image is a little blurry. Certainly in a secondary role over there, I believe. But we have here the celebration, this gesture of celebrating Native culture. I think, and it's certainly something that I think, many of the students who looked at this artwork, really sort of valorized in how they sort of saw this photo. The problem also, so that's the one side, one that I think is genuine and one that I get behind fully. The other side, this what I've sort of framed as the dark side here, is I think that just as, again, one of many examples, the way Native Americans figure within the art and architecture is in the past. So it's always, even at the time of the Charlie Russell or of the sort of construction of some of the other artworks, it was already a retrospective look at Native Americans. And I think one of the sort of problems with this, one of the violences associated with this gesture of placing Native Americans in the past, is that Native Americans also lived in the present and had a future, right? So this is part of a larger logic, colonial logic, which, I think really we see in Charlie Russell paintings, but we see in sort of the still photography work of Curtis, this idea of the vanishing noble savage, a gesture which is once a celebration, but only this sort of belated celebration of a Native American tradition that's gone or vanishing. What does this do? It does several things. It places Native Americans outside of the march of progress, outside of quote-unquote civilization, and further sort of divides the quote-unquote savage from the civilized, right? It also doesn't allow Native Americans or Native American artwork to be contemporized, to show the roles that Native Americans played in modernity and modernization. And it doesn't fully address that even those Native Americans who did vanish, if you will, were done so through sort of aggressive acts. It's not just merely sort of a disappearing. It's by a sort of targeted sort of genocide. So we have a lot going on in this Charlie Russell image. We have, a celebration of Native culture, but this other gesture, which is, has a violence to it. I mean this as a sort of a very genuine sort of, question. How do I teach this weird equivocation, these two gestures, one that I fully get behind and one that I'm very scared of? That this vanishing noble savage trope, I think has been instrumental in sort of genocide within the New World. We see this elsewhere. This sort of equivocation. We have here the Mike and Maureen Mansfield. So this is a completely different sort of context. We get here, but we see this sort of equivocation. We see this sculpture. Mike Mansfield, sort of would only partake in having a sculpture if he included his wife in the work. Again, on one side, we see that this important gesture, a feminist gesture. I think one that many men, the vast majority of men, would not acknowledge the role of their wives in their political work. And it's a gesture that I believe in. Why not acknowledge that? But on the other side, this quote-unquote dark side, I think we see her looking at him. We see her clearly in a secondary role, insofar as she's glancing at him. What does that glance do? It centers him, right? Is her presence there merely to establish her role precisely as secondary? Would it have been better to include her in a role that's intrinsically valorized, not one in a periphery role? I don't know. I think it's an intriguing question and one that sets up a real dilemma as a teacher. And we can see these sort of all throughout. The architecture itself, I think, is is, it's neoclassical architecture. I think neoclassical architecture, all major civilizations, I mean, this is speaking in all too broad terms, have made reference to sort of ancient culture, sort of aesthetic citations within architecture. We have sort of, in the Renaissance onwards, if we talk about humanism as a celebration of virtues again that I believe in, things like democracy, justice, the Enlightenment period, all sort of made reference to classical architecture. Again, things I believe in and I think are important. I'm glad they were involved in the formation of this state. On the other hand, we have this sort of dark side of the architecture. This is an image from the 1883 World's Fair in Chicago. This is the White City. The architects that made this building, I believe, put in a bid for the Capitol, one of the bids. I'm not actually sure if it won the bid. I think they were slightly different architects. Anyways, but it's neoclassical architecture like the Capitol. This is at the White City. So this building here, these World Fairs were gigantic expositions. They still exist, but not anywhere near the magnitude at which they did sort of at the turn of the century. This building in particular was, it was illuminated with Edison's electricity for essentially the first time it was revealed to the public. And they were gigantic affairs. So, I mean, I think, in some of the World's Fairs, a little later than this, we had, I think the most attendance were 27 million, which constituted sort of a big percentage of the world's population. So, they were tremendously sort of successful. And the architecture here, I think, really sort of dominated how these World's Fairs were sort of conducted in the New World. So the original World's Fairs took place in London, in Paris, but came over a little later to North America. And just generally, we have this neoclassical architecture usually at the heart of the World's Fairs. In the center, and they showcased developments in technology. So Edison, I think electricity is a really good example of that, but we have other things, the development of photography, any sort of technologies. It was really a celebration of modernization. But what you also saw at these was early anthropological exhibits, ethnographic displays, which were on the periphery of the plans of the World's Fairs. So we have really problematic depictions of other cultures. These are often called human zoos. Rarely were people brought against their own will, but there were cases of that. But we have here an array of different cultures sort of presenting sort of what was presented as their home life. So we have, in this World's Fair, we had the Filipino village, which was, I think it was the biggest ethnographic display ever at any World's Fairs. I think close to 2,000 inhabitants were brought from the Philippines. I mean, if you know anything about the Philippines, it's hundreds and hundreds of different islands that are linguistically and culturally distinct. But they were all put in one village and essentially made to sort of perform primitiveness. The Philippines had been a Spanish colony for 200 years. They had a sophisticated sort of political system. But in these ethnographic displays, they were sort of, these real cliched ideas of primitiveness meant to, basically wear a loincloth and sacrifice animals, do some dancing around a fire, and hold a spear. So what we have here at these World's Fairs is really a type of cultivation of the idea of civilization. We have these inner core, this neo classical architecture as in the center, and on the periphery we have these human zoos. And what's going on here is they're being contrasted. You know, they're being foiled. They're really sort of defining each other. We have here the birth of the idea of civilization and progress. And the way it gets value is by foiling off of these performances of savagery, right? We have here really at the largest scale imaginable at a global this sort of PR campaign of really establishing this sort of the non-humanness of non-whites. I mean, right at the same time as this is taking place, we have the Spanish-American War, and the U.S. is at war with the Philippines, and really a sort of really violent encounter under the guise of civilizing, even though the Philippines had been sort of under Spanish rule for 200 years. You know, we're Catholic, and you know, anyways, all of which is to say that neoclassical architecture has a troubled history, right? And you know, or it has this equivocal history, this ambiguous, you know, these virtues that I think all of us can get behind, democracy, as well as being employed within these other colonial projects. And just if you think I'm being hyperbolic, I mean, I'm working on another project where I didn't totally realize how much Hitler was influenced by ideas of American sort of ideas of the American frontier and its sort of expansion into the West. You know, part of the justification of the Spanish-American War was a continued expansion westward. I mean, really, they wanted, you know, access to Chinese markets, but it was the same logic, frontier logic. This idea of manifest destiny, that you know, sort of the Far East, we could continue onwards, past the West into the Philippines, and you know, it's a cornucopia really here for Europeans to sort of use as a resource. I didn't realize that, you know, this inspired much of Hitler's logic in expanding eastward into Europe, from Germany into Russia, Poland, Ukraine. He was really inspired by this, and of course, you know, the Nazis really employed neoclassical architecture, the same architecture. Well, thanks for bearing with this little tangent, but this is the sort of terrain when doing a history of the capital that you have to cross, right, with students. And it's slightly dangerous, right? These are dangerous, but also things that I think I want really are emblematic of this humanities style of filmmaking, right? Filmmaking is not merely a technical operation of recording, right? It's engaging with these, you know, sort of baffling histories that challenge you, that you're embroiled in. And so the way this 2-week class worked is that we would bring in a group of scholars to touch on all these issues, right? It's interdisciplinary, so we had not only film sort of production instructors, but we had sort of Virginia Reeves. She's a professor at Helena College. She's an award-winning novelist. She was longlisted on the Booker Prize. We had her come in and talk about narrative structures, the 3-act structure, character development. We had her talk about how architecture is already a story, right? That these founding stories about Montana have many of the elements of stories. They have a beginning, a middle, an end. They have characters. Who gets to be a Montanan, right? I showed you that sort of those types on the rotunda ceiling. You know, these are elements of a plot, right? And so how do you sort of translate that to a documentary? We had art professor Seth Roby come in and really sort of cultivate their creative muscles. We had a sociology professor, Kim Feig, come in and teach them about manifest destiny and gender and the myth of the frontier. Teaching this is really a blessing. It's, the NEH provided a substantive amount of money to do this. So as an instructor, it's a dream scenario. I can do, I have a lot of resources. So I was able to assemble sort of a dream team. I was able to bring in a former student of mine who just won an Academy Award in cinematography. Rose Bush, she won the 2021 short documentary Academy Award for the film called Colette. And she's very much into this. I taught her in this humanities style of filmmaking, and she uses it currently in her own film production. And, I flew her in from France, where she was at sort of Cannes Film Festival. So it was a sort of embarrassment of riches being able to teach this. But it's a very rigorous sort of class. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have a student here who you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions to. It's, teaching filmmaking itself is hard enough in 2 weeks, but to do this humanities methodology with, we had a host of historians come in, all of which sort of brought a different spin on the Capitol and had their own sort of, disciplines that they brought to it. So slightly too ambitious, I would say. It was long, grueling hours. It was like, full days for these students. And it was work. But those are some of the challenges that we faced, this sort of, as I've called it, this equivocation. I mean, here's my solution to this, is that, it's I guess, a non-solution solution. I would just set up what you might call a catch-22. I would show both sides of this equivocation, this darker side as well as this sort of virtuous side, that are incompatible, and let the students sort of deal with that, right? And that's sort of how we proceeded. And I'm interested to see how you think it sort of panned out. Okay, I guess we'll get to the film just shortly. I want to tell you a little bit about, we have one more year, about some of the changes that I think I'm going to make. There were shortcomings, there were successes and shortcomings to the first 2 years. And I think the shortcomings are themselves sort of great problems to have. The first film on the Spanish flu, it's done tremendously well sort of on the festival circuit. Last week it was nominated to the national, what is the actual term? The National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the Emmys. It was nominated for Best Long-Form Documentary. So that's great. It won regionals. So it's one of the top 5 films in the nation, essentially, to get nominated. And I think it's amazing, and I think this film has already won several awards. It's been accepted into a dozen film festivals around the globe and won a grand jury prize. It won an audience award, an audience choice award. That's no doubt a success. But I guess this has also become a bit of a shortcoming. So what do I mean by this? I think, there's a way in which the teaching film can't totally be about the quality of the end product. It's got to be about the process of making it. I think students learn best when they're in a slightly low-stakes environment where they can make mistakes. And I think some of the success of the first year and the second year put too much pressure on the students to sort of make a great product. I think I think I'm guilty of this too. I think getting into all these film festivals and winning all these awards, it's sort of like playing a video game and collecting, sort of prizes. I get a little caught up with it at the expense of the students' sort of educational experience. this is a slightly different way than I normally teach film production, and I think I'm going to revert back to it in the third year, or I am going to. So rather than just have one film where we have, you know, a dozen students work on one film, I think in the final year we're going to have each student make their own film, or do it in partners, and on one theme. And I think it will slowly make the stakes they'll make them a little lower, I think. And I think it has some other advantages. I think if the students are working on something that's more their own project, their own film, they'll be slightly more creatively invested. On this topic, the students put a particular spin on the Capitol, and there was a bunch of different candidates for spins or angles on how to frame the Capitol, and they were different. And not all, you know, only one of, say, half a dozen ways to talk about the Capitol got picked, and there was resentments for those people who didn't get their idea put forward, which, you know, I think is part of what working on a film set's like, and I'm glad they experienced it. But I think also working on your own film can, you know, bear fruit where it's your project. And so every student working on their own film, I think we're going to try that in the final year. Another sort of shortcoming of this model, like as I said, it was this sort of embarrassment of riches. I could invite these great team of historians, and all these professors and filmmakers from around the world flew in. But it's a lot of chefs in the kitchen. It was you know, a lot of powerful voices, which I mean, next year I'm thinking of inviting a MacArthur Fellow. You know, a MacArthur genius. I just don't totally know how to manage all those voices in the classroom with sort of unify them. I don't know how I'm going to solve that problem, but those are some of the shortcomings I think that I'm trying to take sort of an honest look in the mirror, and sort of have the best sort of outcome in this last year. This last year is the topic is on fishing in Montana. The history of fishing, which again is very broad, but I think if there's a dozen students, you know, they'll have their own spin on it and can go in a lot of different directions. If you know anyone, you know, they can, you know, a young person around a high school senior, give or take a year or so, I encourage them to sign up. You can sign up on the Helena landing page of the website. There's a link for Humanities Through Film, and they can enroll there. But I think it's a lot to throw at you, but that's the sort of context in which this film came about. We're going to screen it now. It's about 18 minutes. And then, yeah, I'm here to answer any questions. Please think of questions. And there's a student here as well. You'll have the opportunity. So with that, here's the film. Thank you.
The National Endowment for the Humanities, bringing you the stories that define us.
I see the world differently than most people. I have an eye condition that alters my depth perception. Sometimes things feel like an optical illusion or appear flat, almost like a picture. I can't really tell the heights of objects or how far or near things are to my position. And I mainly navigate using light and shadows, so everything can look different depending on the day or the weather. makes being at the Montana Capitol uncomfortable. When I'm in the building, it feels like I shouldn't be here. Everything feels imposing and intimidating, almost as if the architecture itself is looking down on me. Being a foster kid, I often feel ignored by my government, and being here reminds me of that. I've heard how other people have felt excluded from the Capitol too, but I know that some people don't share that perspective. Sometimes, I wonder how other people see it.
I personally feel like it's a really grand, beautiful space, and that it's my space.
I love the Capitol building. It's such a cool combination of old and new. And it really is got great architecture and great emphasis on all the things that were important about the Capitol through all of the years. So I think it's great.
I can see how it could feel intimidating or a symbol of power. It's too grand, it's not for us. But once you get over that sense of being intimidated and you walk across the threshold and you realize, yeah, I feel like this is ours.
The Capitol is my place of business, so it's an office. It is a place to meet legislators, and you get to see the legislature at work every day. During session, it's one of my most favorite things to watch, to go down and see in the House and the Senate people learning, voting, and representing us.
The reason Montana needed a capital, of course, is tied to its achievement of statehood in 1889. Of course, it needed a physical place to house the operations of government. Originally, in 1892, there were 7 communities that vied to become capital. No place got a majority of the votes, so it came down to a runoff in 1894 between Helena and Anaconda. Of course, Anaconda was a company town for the Anaconda Mining Company, and Helena had been the territorial capital. So it was kind of a banking center. There were lots of pretty wealthy people here. It was a very heated, very vitriolic contest. Marcus Daly, who was head of the Anaconda Company, of course, advocated for Anaconda to become the capital because that would greatly benefit him personally and his company. William Clark championed Helena and said that, no, Helena needed to be the capital because Anaconda was so horrible. They didn't pull any punches with what they said about each other. Helena depicted Anaconda as being under the thumb of the Anaconda Company, saying that this one extremely powerful, influential, important company would have a stranglehold on Montana politics if the capital were located in Anaconda. The people in Anaconda and their supporters said, Helena's just full of a bunch of snobs and rich people, and they don't have any, they don't relate to other ordinary common Montanans, and our interests won't be represented if it goes to Helena. Helena won that election, so 1894, Helena becomes the permanent state capital, and work can begin on a building that will house government, provide the physical operations necessary, but also make a bold visual statement about Montana's willingness and ability to assume its rightful role as a full-fledged state. They wanted something Montanans could be proud of, something Montanans could identify with, and something that said to people from other states in the Union that, we're here and we belong here and we're ready to go and be part of this nation. And we're equipped physically to do that, but we also have the iconography, the symbols, the art and architecture that says not only where we came from, but where we want to go. It's not the largest by any means, but I certainly think it's up there with the prettiest. And I think part of that definitely has to do with the artwork and the fact that it tells a Montana story, and you can come here and you can learn about the past and what people in Montana at the time, what they valued and what they saw as being significant from their past. I think largely it still functions the way it always did. I mean, I think hopefully most Montanans feel welcome here, like they can come in and explore the Capitol and see the artwork and watch the legislature in action and feel at home and feel welcome.
The way I view the Capitol is shaped so much by my life experiences and who I am as a person. But what I've really learned is that different perspectives is a key part of what this building was supposed to represent. It was the people's house, a place where people from all backgrounds with completely opposing views could come and try to better the state. But with a modern lens, it's easy to see that representation is sometimes lacking. The building itself tells a history in which many are sidelined or misrepresented. I'm critical of the way history is shown in this building, but that's because I want it to uphold the promise it made to Montanans when it was first built.
When they started selecting the artwork, I think the idea of inclusion or representing was not, I mean, I think that would have been a fairly foreign concept to them. I don't think it's something, in the way that we think of it, I don't think it's something they would have taken into account. I think they did, to some extent, take it into account in the Rotundo, where they wanted different types of Montanans, the people that they thought at that point represented our past. And so I think to some extent they were being inclusive, but I think it was a very Eurocentric viewpoint of who should be included.
Thinking about the time the Capitol was built and that historic context and who it represented. American Indians weren't citizens yet. That didn't happen until 1924. Then women couldn't vote yet. And so you think about who was engaged in our political system was white males. And so the original building, that's who it was designed to work for. It was interesting times for the tribes. A lot of students were getting sent away to boarding schools. Religions, the ceremonies were outlawed. It was a very difficult, challenging time. There was a lot of racism and discrimination. And so around that time period, things weren't that good, but yet, cultures, languages, traditions, ceremonies survived. I think we've become more inclusive just by what we've done here in the Capitol with some of the imagery regarding American Indians. So I think that is progressive. It's kind of symbolic how we've come along as a country. I love the one in the House of Representatives just because it's so massive. And the fact that the Salish are in the front and Lewis and Clark are in the back. I think Charlie Russell was very intentional on that. And to me, that is not putting the white explorers as the main guys, but it was putting the Salish as the main people. And so I really appreciated him doing that. And so I think that's probably one of my favorite pieces. And it's so big too. And it just looks cool. Just thinking about the design and the pictures and the imagery, it's like all the Indians presented in a historic sense, and not brought up to today. And I think that is interesting, kind of captured in time, but, who were they back then when the building was built? What we're seeing now is a more inclusion of contemporary, portrayals of American Indians. And to me, what is really powerful, and it makes me feel really good when I walk by the building, is to have that new tribal flags monument right out in front of the Capitol. I don't think any other state has that. And so that is more of a recent development where American Indian people have taken a more active role in Montana politics, which is great.
During the 60s and, well, 50s and 60s, architecture changed. People wanted to get rid of the old and do new. They weren't really interested in keeping a lot of the historic integrity of the building. And so they didn't, because a lot of things disappeared and then we brought it back. But we were able to look at, old photographs to bring back the integrity of this space. I think what I got out of it was during the restoration is just being able to take that vision of the original architects and bring back some of those qualities that retain that historical integrity. And history doesn't stop at a certain period. I mean, we felt we had to restore this to a certain period just to bring back its integrity. But, really, history just keeps going. And you really should celebrate that too. Some changes aren't good, but, it also is part of the history and you have to respect that.
One of the things that the Capitol does for us is it gives us a place to honor people and to show the world and Montanans who we think is important, what we think is important. When you walk up that landing and there's Jeanette Rankin on one side and Wilberforce Sanders on the other, they're just two of the people that we're honoring. Jeanette Rankin was a suffragist, and she's best known for being the first woman to serve as a representative in Congress. She joined other legislators in voting against World War I, and she actually was the sole representative to vote against the U.S. entry into World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And then on the other side, you have Wilberforce Sanders, and he is best known as one of the leaders of the vigilantes. But vigilantes are really extra-legal hangings, especially in the very early days when Wilberforce Sanders was involved. There was no law enforcement, and they were trying to create some kind of law enforcement apparatus. But vigilantism continued in Montana long after we had police officers and county courthouses and jails. There was someone that was taken from the jail here in Helena and lynched by a vigilante mob. So he's another symbol of Montana and what we stand for. And so I just think that that's interesting to have the two of them standing side by side, and pacifism on the one side and vigilantism on the other.
I am just walking through for the first time since I was about 16 when I was a page in the Senate. Actually, it's been really interesting to walk through the halls, and I'm reading all of the descriptions of the famous people, like Montanans of note, and there's a lot of female Montanans listed in the hallways, which I never noticed before. So it's been really cool to read some of that stuff this morning and just get kind of infused with like the vibrancy and the energy of how powerful and strong Montana people are.
The National Women's Suffrage Constitutional Amendment passes in 1920, but Montana women received the right to vote in 1914, so it's 6 years before the National Amendment. Most Native women were not allowed to vote until 1924 with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. And as part of the commemoration of women's suffrage in Montana, there were two legislators that pushed through a bill to authorize new art in the Capitol. And they also wanted to focus on women as community builders. They were really interested in showing women's roles and their significance to the state. I think it's really important to have the women's murals here to bring everyday women into the Capitol and to recognize the contributions of everyday people and to realize that this Capitol is for us and about us, and we belong here, and the work that's done here is our work. I feel like the women's mural in part symbolizes that.
The original intent of the building was to unite the citizens of the newfound state, to be a place where democracy can shine, where history is celebrated alongside hope. Since the founding of the state and the construction of the Capitol, so much has changed. Our history has grown since then. History, it isn't stagnant. It's ongoing. I used to think the way I saw the Capitol prevented me from ever being a part of it. But now I've learned that different perspectives can move history forward.
You could compare it to how we are as a democracy, that we're always improving. and getting better, thinking about the capital and the state of Montana. You know, we're all working on getting better.
I actually don't understand how that glitch was possible, but I think it was, yeah, I think we just lost some B-roll there. I think it has something to do with the player that was on there. But anyways, yeah, that's Phil. Thanks for your patience. We have time for some questions either for me or for the student. Maybe we'll do questions for me first if that works.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Ari? Of course.
So I was interested when you said that there were 5, 6 different approaches that were under consideration by the students, and I'm just wondering what some of the other ones were.
Yeah, they were all fascinating, to tell the truth. You know, one of them was to tell it as a ghost story, so a haunted house. You know, we were sort of engaging with the sort of history of architecture in film, and it was surprising how many of those were sort of horror films. Or, you know, the haunted house is a figure, but I think you know, ghosts in general were you know, they lent themselves to some of the ambiguity we were interested in. You know, ghosts are these weird, what you might call liminal figures, like they're both dead and alive, they're both visible, invisible, but neither solely dead or neither solely live, neither solely visible, neither solely invisible. Like they're this you know, trope that deals with ambiguity really well in architecture. That was one which I thought was fascinating. You know, some of the others aren't coming to mind right now. But maybe the student might remember a few of them. But I would say they were all quite interesting and had potential. And the students fought forward their ideas, and not all won. And it was there was some tension. There was some tension. And yeah. Any other questions?
Any more questions? I just learned I'm not supposed to stand in front of the camera.
We're very fortunate to have one of our students here. Trance, would you like to come up as well? And I think Trance deserves a round of applause. I mean, really what was amazing about Trance is that I don't think he really had used the camera very much. And there's all this fancy camera gear, and you know, we were looking for volunteers in the different departments, you know, audio, camera, writers, producers, and he just took this giant gimbal, which is like this robotic thing with a camera, and he's like, I'll do it, and just jumped right in a way that I think, you know, took a lot of courage and modeled the posture for other students who I saw, they saw him jump in, and it really was, we cultivated some really good chemistry in the class, and I think it's a testament to Trance, and Trance got early acceptance into Montana State Film Program recently, and yeah, he was a great student to have. So anyways, any questions for Trance or me?
I have a question. Is this, when you signed up for this class, is filmmaking something that you kind of put yourself into looking to do in the future, or was this just a challenge to yourself?
Well, I was interested in it, but I didn't know for sure. So I definitely saw the film class and thought, well, if I want to do it, this is a way how to get into it fully and know that I wanted to do it. And so I did the class, and it really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. And I applied to MSU after and got accepted into the film program, and now I hope to do it later in life.
Fantastic. Any other questions? What did you think of the whole program? I mean, doing this in 2 weeks sounds like impossible to me, but how did you feel about, the time crunch?
I thought it was really fun, actually. It definitely pushed us to get our minds straight at the beginning and know what we wanted to do. Like, there was a whole bunch of different ways that we could have gone, and I definitely think this is one of the best ways we could have done it. And it just helped us really get into what we wanted to do and let everyone be hands-on right away. And so I thought it was really fun and a good way to do it.
And what was your favorite part?
Well, definitely filming, because I never got to put my hands on a camera or do anything else, and I kind of jumped into the role of being the lead cinematographer for the movie, and it was just a really fun way to get into that. So.
When do you guys hear back from film festivals for this one?
So we've heard back from a bunch, and it's gotten into about a dozen film festivals already. So, the sort of timing of things, the festivals, we won't hear back from them all until basically a year. So, but it's done sort of shockingly well, and yeah, I'm very happy with how it's done on the film festival circuit. Ultimately, I think just getting this film out there to as many people as possible is really the goal, as much as sort of the accolades. And it's good for the students just to have an audience. I feel very honored to be a part of this. I think it's a really rare situation where you can, I believe I've drunk the Kool-Aid on the humanities, especially this sort of humanities style of teaching filmmaking. It works, and I think even through a whole undergraduate degree, which is really what I'm trying to condense into 2 weeks, you have very few circumstances where you learn these humanities methods and tools, make a creative work, and have it have a consequence in the world. And you might have, in your undergrad, you might have, a transformative epiphany with a novel or something, or you might have a capstone thesis, but they don't really have an audience and don't have very large stakes. This has a huge audience. The first film we tried to do the math. The first film got seen by, I think, a few thousand people, and this, we're hopeful through the Montana Historical Society, this will be sort of used in the curriculum in Helena, perhaps the state. That's something amazing, really, for these students to experience, and so part of the applying to these film festivals is just getting it out there, having an audience.
What is the one takeaway that you have from doing all of this that you feel like you're going to be able to use in your future filmmaking?
Definitely the processing of how we made the film. it just really helped us like figure out how to make it and get started. They taught it really well, especially with all the people that they brought in. It was a really good addition onto the program. I thought it definitely gave us all the background knowledge and all that stuff to keep on going in the future.
Any more questions? I'm hogging the microphone, so. No other questions? Well, thank you guys very much for sharing this experience.
Thank you all.